Grace and peace, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you're having a magnanimous day. It is your girl, Yammy, aka Yams be saying, and you are now tuned into Can I Be Honest? And can I be honest? I have a wonderful, 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 wonderful leader, speaker, influencer, um, by the name of Elder Sonya Cruz. I call her Auntie. You may have seen me interviewing her when she was talking about her passion, which is being a transition coach. And I would argue that I can go on and on about explaining who she is personally to me, but I want you guys to get a feel for who she is. So, Elder Sonya Cruz, if you would let the people know a little bit about you. Like, who are you?
Well, first, I just want to say thank you so much for allowing me this opportunity to be on with you. I think you are just a fantastic human to begin with. I think your family is just adorable, and I love your kid and your husband. You all are just a special bunch of people. So it's my honor to share today. I am Sonya Cruel. I am a social worker by profession. I have been a social worker for over 30 years, a very long time. But I still love what I do. I am a therapist, a licensed clinical social worker. I am a transition coach and a crisis intervention person, a grief counselor, all of the stuff that goes with social work, the stuff that I love doing. That's why it's so hard for me to really make a living off of being a transition coach because I don't want to charge. But I am an aunt. I just love life. I love the things of God. I love God's people. And I continue to grow as a human being. I think everybody has value. I think there is no one race above any other race. I think we are all created equal. And I think we all have a destiny. We are all put here for a purpose. And I think that God would not have allowed us to come if He didn't have work for us to do. Regardless of who we are, regardless of where we come from, how we got here, we all have a task. We all have a job to do.
Girl, we hadn't even started, and she already preaching. Hello. So, as I've explained in some of the other interviews, I am a licensed minister. But what you may not know is that Elder Sonya was one of them who helped usher me into the licensing construct of ministry. I did have a master's in Christian ministry, but if anybody who's ever gone through the process knows, you don't just go ahead and get some scholarly knowledge. You need to know what the church itself is doing. And Elder Sonya was actually one of my professors who helped give me the guidelines for actual on the job training for ministry. So she is very valuable to me. Just because she served as a mentor and a loving person for me to be introduced to the faith from the new transition. She's a transition coach, so she deals with different kinds of transitions, but she was helping me to transitions. So I was
Don't be deceived. She was already doing the work of the ministry, honey. She just needed a piece of paper so that the man can be satisfied. She was called from the foundations of the earth. She was already working in ministry. She was already doing what she needed to do. She just wanted that piece of paper for the people that say, well, where are your credentials? She can say, here's my credentials. But she was doing it a long time ago. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, well, enough about me. So, Sonya, if you could tell us a little bit about your kind of religious background. Were you always raised in church?
So no, this is the craziest story. So I remember at an early age, around 8, 9, somewhere in there, we did not go to church. I remember sitting at the foot of my mother's bed watching television so that I could see church.
Oh, wow.
That's how I was introduced to church. And eventually I told my mom that, Mom, I want to go to church. So she allowed us to go to church with one of the neighbors, and then she decided, I guess we needed a little bit more. So we went to this Presbyterian church, and my sister and I joined. There was nobody else that from our family that was a member of this church. But for some reason, we felt we needed to join. I assume it was the Holy Ghost. I don't really know. So for a while, we went there, and then my aunt told my mom about this Baptist church downtown. We lived in out in the suburbs. So we started going to this church downtown, and that's where I really began to study the Word of God. And eventually, I transferred over to a non-denominational church where I was introduced into the prophetic. I saw uh, women ministers. I was introduced to intercessory prayer, just a lot of stuff that I did not know about. That I was introduced that I was not introduced in the Baptist church. Even though it laid a good foundation for me, it helped me with my leadership skills. It helped me with being a part of a group. So it provided a lot of foundational stuff. But when it was time to transition to the next place, I was introduced to a lot of stuff that not necessarily that particular Baptist church believed in. And one of those was women ministers. So I got to see women ministers. I got to see women actually doing the work of the ministry, which was just so encouraging. It just blew my mind. That's where I first met a lot of the famous people that we now know. They were coming to our church. Just it was just mind blowing and very encouraging for me.
I think when I was in seminary, one of the things as a part of coursework that we were responsible for doing was going to different churches outside of our denomination just to
Uh-huh.
kind of see how they worship. So, like for
Hmm.
me, I went to I think I went to a mosque and saw like I don't know synagogue and
Uh-huh.
saw how Jewish people worship. I went to a Catholic church and things like that. And what it did for me, even though it wasn't my
Hmm.
principal relation, what it did for me was introduce me to different styles of connecting to the same God.
Amen.
And
Yes.
I think that with this in part what you said, you may have you didn't start off in church like like me
Hmm.
for instance, but those different experiences have
Hmm.
cultivated who you are and
Absolutely.
who you help to minister other people. And I think it's super important to be that flexible with your
I,
learning
yeah,
process.
yeah. I think it's just it's so invaluable for us to realize everybody's not going to do it like we do it, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not going to heaven. Just because we do praise and worship for a good 30, 45 minutes, they may sing hymns, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to heaven, and that doesn't mean that they're not preaching about the same God. So
Hmm.
we have to not knock somebody else's way of worshiping God. I may be loud, somebody else may be quiet, but that doesn't mean that they didn't love God. It doesn't mean that they're not going to heaven.
That's good. That's really good. Also, do you have any theological training, like outside of ministers and training? Do you have any like a bachelor's or master's or a PhD or something like
I
that?
do not. I do not.
So your foundational, like, where how did you receive instruction for actually becoming a minister and then eventually an elder?
So I was at a former church where they did a ministers in training, and it was very much like a university. They had they had several tracks. If you wanted just to be if you were going toward a fivefold ministry, you had a track. If you were going just for a helps ministry, you had a track. So, and then if you were going as a deacons ministry, you had a track. So I originally started out as just a helps ministry, and then I switched over to the MIT, and that lasted for 2 years. That included internship, that included tests and finals, that included actual preaching. It included anything that you can think of that would provide you the foundational stuff that you needed for ministry, of about administration. As a matter of fact, a lot of the books that I use now were the books that we used when I was in training. We actually had to buy books. There was no, can I get a copy of your book, that chapter? No, you had to buy the book.
That's actually really good because what most people think that being a minister is what you do on the pulpit, but actually the
Hmm.
ministry calling is the
Hmm.
administrative work and the stuff
Hmm.
outside of the
Hmm.
preaching on the pulpit.
Absolutely. The preaching on the podium is one, really, to be totally honest, it's such a small, minute part of what you do. Not that it's not important. Bringing people to Christ is very important, but you got to know how to minister to people. You got to know how to, if you are going to have a church, you got to know the administrative part of it. You got to know how to deal with human resources. You got to know how to deal with someone that's in the middle of a crisis. Just so much more stuff legally that you have to know when you are talking about going into ministry.
Oh, that's really good. Okay, so tell us about the call. When did you receive the call to ministry? And I put it
So
in
you know,
quotation marks, but you
yeah,
know what
right,
I
right,
mean.
right, right. This is the craziest thing for me. I think I do believe that we all come with a purpose. And I think I really came with the purpose of being a minister and providing service to his people. I've always had the desire to lead. I've always had the desire to help people. I like to say sometimes if I'm in a room full of people and nobody's gonna take the lead, I'm gonna take it. We're just not gonna sit here and do nothing and wait for somebody to come. But I believe when I was at New Covenant Christian Ministries in Lithonia is when it began to really, really, I began to really sense that, okay, it's time for me to, come out of the back and really do something. So that's when it really began. My pastor would always say, when are you going to get started in the school of ministry, what it was called then?
Mhm.
And I was like, I'll take a class or two, but I don't need that. I ain't got to do all that. If Jesus just give me the power, I'm good. And then he along with another lady, Elder Margot Parsons, had to say, we understand that you are called, but sometimes people won't take just our word. They want a piece of paper. And that's the reason why I really just started going through it and getting the foundational stuff that I needed. And then once I was there, I really realized that there was a lot that I really needed that those classes provided. Just really simple stuff about what your calling is, your gifts, and just very elementary stuff that I thought I didn't need, but I really needed.
That's really good. So like it's one thing to receive the call. It's another
Hmm.
thing to accept it. So
Hmm.
what are some reasons that you accepted uh to walk the path of ministry and eventually elder?
So for me, I think it was the teachings that we were receiving, in that, everybody has purpose. Everybody has a reason for being here on this earth. You came with that. Now, whether or not you are open to it, whether or not you respond to it, that's totally between you and God. But then when I began to see that my purpose was to be a minister. My purpose was to be an ordained minister, so that I could provide services in elements that wouldn't necessarily receive me without those papers.
Mm,
So I began to see, you know what, this is bigger than me. This is much larger than what I was focusing on. I was focusing on just doing the work in this little circle, but God was saying, no, you need to expand how you see this. This is not just about you. This is not just about at this little bitty church that you are at. Even it's not a little church. It was like 2,000 people,
yeah,
but it's it was more than that. And then I had to say to myself, okay, all right, so it's time for me to do what I need to do. Then I started going to the ministers, roundtable meetings that the pastor would have once a month for the ministers. So I started to really take the calling more serious and know that it was serious. It wasn't just something that man said that you had to do. This is something that God said that I had to do. This is something God said that this is what I want you to do, and this is the path that I want you to go.
mm,
So I settled down and said, you know what? Let's do it. And I have to say that it has been a blessing, and it was the right way. I now see that you shouldn't just give people a label. You shouldn't just give people a piece of paper and say, go out. All right, now go preach. No, it's so much more to that. It's so much more to being a pastor or being a minister than just preaching on Sundays. You hold people's lives in your hand. You want to make sure that you give them sound biblical information. When you minister to someone that's grieving, We want to make sure that you have a good foundation, or you can refer them to someone that can help them. And again, they like to say, well, I'm just going to go to the minister and he's going to tell me. Your minister may not have the goods to tell you. So
Yes.
he has to be able, or she has to be comfortable in her or his own skin enough to say, you know what, this is out of my area of expertise. Let me refer you to someone. And so that's one of the things that you learn as a minister. You can't be all things to all people because it's just not in your wheelhouse.
It's so funny that you say that because the day that Tim and I received our license, my parents were in town
Hmm.
for there, and one of the things that he said, my dad, who's been a pastoring for over 40 years, he was like, "I've done a lot," and he has a lot of education and has
Hmm.
worked in various kind of
Hmm.
realms,
Hmm.
but I've done a lot, but there is not a path that I would have chose. Basically, he was expressing how grateful he was
Hmm.
for the path
Hmm.
that God had given him to
Hmm.
shepherding people. And for me, as a pastor's kid, it's always been like, "What? Like, go ahead and retire. The people have exhausted you. I'm sure.
Uh-huh,
Go ahead and
uh-huh,
you don't
uh-huh.
have to keep doing this for longer." But for real, like once you really kind of tune into it, there is something deeper than yourself
Yes.
that makes you push towards the constant serving of people and the rendering of services, but also recognizing when you're not in position to actually do something that would be effective and that you need to outsource.
Hmm.
You know what
Hmm.
I'm saying?
Hmm.
It's not. It's
Hmm.
more than just a calling. It's more than just
Yes.
someone telling you or giving you a piece of paper, like you mentioned. But it's actually something inward that you have
Yes.
to have, so that you can make sure that you are effectively following the path that helps the people that you are assigned to.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so much for me. I am at the place of, you know what, even though you I think about the people that have not necessarily received my counsel or received the information that I had to share with them. Understand, I've never been like leading from the first chair. I've always led from the second chair. So there was always a minister or the pastor that was over me. So one of the things I had to learn was how to navigate what he wanted or what she wanted and not necessarily what I wanted.
Hmm.
I never took for granted that this was my church, that this was my organization. No, it wasn't. I've always led from the second chair, which means that you get the heart of the pastor. You follow what would the pastor do in this situation. It's not about what I wanted, and sometimes people find that hard to believe and hard to understand. But when you are a minister, there that's not the time for you to go and do your own thing in that particular house that you're in. You may have a minute para ministry, but you don't get the right to say, you know what, now that I'm a minister, I'm gonna do it this way. No, because you are a minister, you are even more submitted to the man that or the woman that's sitting in the first chair. So I read a book called Leading from the Second Chair, and it
Mm.
talks about how sometimes when you don't necessarily agree with what the first chair is doing, but you never let the congregation or never let the people see that. It's always a backroom conversation, and you always promote what the leader from the first chair is doing. You always do that. And sometimes I think people don't necessarily understand that when it comes to ministry. This is not my thing. This is ultimately, of course, God's thing, but ultimately I report to the guy in the first chair, and sometimes that's hard for people.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that. You mentioned a little bit about opposition. When you did receive kind of the calling, did you experience any opposition?
So when I received the calling, no, I did not, because people were already thinking that I was a minister. They already said, "Well, aren't you already ordained? Mm-mm. Aren't you already licensed? Mm-mm. Haven't you already been to the process? Mm-mm. I'm just doing the work, honey. And people just assumed that I was already licensed, which was so crazy. I
Mm.
guess it was a good thing, but they just assumed that I was already doing the work, and I really wasn't. So when it happened, people were like, girl, we already knew that. We knew that was going to happen. My parents, not my parents, my grandmother used to say that, oh, you're just gonna marry a preacher. I don't know what she saw, but she said, y'all just gonna be in ministry. That's just what y'all gonna do. And at first I was like, nah, that's not gonna happen. And it my life has lined up that way. That's everything I do is about ministry or helping people or God and just seeing. I want to see people whole. I want them to see them not just whole in their bodies, but whole in their pocketbooks, in their wallets, whole in their minds, whole in their spirits. Just living a full life. You don't have to wait till you get to heaven to live a great life. You can do it here and being free. Get rid of all of that, all of those generational curses. Get rid of those soul ties. Get rid of that negative thinking that you have going on. Just be free. And that's, of course, that's ministry, but that's what I do, whether it's in the
Mm,
church or out of the church.
that's really good. That's really good. You mentioned earlier that you had that when you eventually started going to church, you got an opportunity to see women in ministry. Talk about the effects of seeing women in ministry and how that kind of mentored to you as well.
So the first time, if I called her name right now, you would say, "Oh, I knew her when she was just starting out, and she would wear all black, and her hair was black, and she was one. She was a young girl at the time, a young lady at the time, and her mom used to travel with her all of the time.
Hmm.
So do you know who I'm talking about?
I have an idea.
That's her. Uh, So she was one of the first young people, but I saw a lot of older people at that time. That women that were, the pastor was allowing them to preach. He was allowing them to lead service, and I was like, oh, okay. That's how it's done. Because I had been so long at the other church and I'd never seen a woman, as a matter of fact, the woman didn't even sit in the pulpit. It was just
Mhm.
cuckoo for cocoa puffs, but that's how they do it.
Yeah.
But then when I went to Living Word, I began to see it was so encouraging, so warm. I was like, okay, I can do that. I can do they He allowed you to be free. He allowed you to use your gift. He didn't stifle, what God had given you. And it was just so refreshing for me. And I was a little nervous wreck. And even so, when he would call me to do certain things, that it was just it was like an aha. It was like, yeah, we can do this. Okay, God, I see. I'm not totally crazy. It just began to just open me up just to do ministry all the more.
That's so important for what you said, because a lot of times if you kind of grow up in a posture where you don't necessarily see um, someone doing something,
Uh-huh.
you might think that avenue was not afforded to you.
Right,
What's
right,
the
right,
representation matters, and even
right,
in ministry for
right,
women, it matters to see someone not just doing something on Women's Day. You know what I'm saying?
correct. Come on, yes.
We got to see women actually operating in the trenches and on the pulpit so that we can kind of see like where God can use us. And it's so hard for me, especially because I do read my Bible and like
Uh-huh,
and I have studied. I used to at church that I go to now, I used to teach the women of the Bible course at some
uh-huh,
point, and
uh-huh.
of course it opened up my eyes to like there were women in ministry serving Jesus in the same capacity that these disciples were serving,
Yes,
but they
yes.
don't get the same acknowledgement.
Yes, that was even women on the battlefield. Come on, Deborah. They
Yes,
wasn't sitting down just twiddling their thumbs and putting out the communion cups.
it's not to say that whoever does that is not
Correct,
operating in their ministry,
correct,
but at the
correct.
same token, it does mean a lot more to me. And I've had mentorship from a male and female, but it does mean more to me to see women operating in their gifts, because it's almost like it gives me permission
Mm-hmm,
to go
mm-hmm.
ahead and operate in that same thing. Same thing with seeing you. Like um seeing you operate in your capacities kind of open up my eyes or broaden my perspective so
Uh-huh.
that I'm not limiting myself or my giftings. I may not have had like the traditional public speaking background
Right.
or training per se, but that doesn't mean that God can't put me in that position to
Absolutely.
move. You know what I'm saying? And the same thing.
Absolutely.
So I don't know
Absolutely.
if I've said that enough to you, but seeing you operate in your gifting has been like a silent mentorship to me.
Wow.
'Cause every time I see
Wow.
you doing it, I'm like, all right, then I can go ahead and keep doing the stuff that I'm doing. You know what I'm saying?
So
Which
you
is
know what? It was the time that I was at my last church. The time that I was at Fresh Start. That was a time when he said, "All right, you got the gift. Just go out and do it. Just go do it. Just do it." And even when we would have meeting, or when I would meet with pastor, he would say, "So what are you doing about your personal ministry? So where are you with this? Or what have you, last time we talked, you were supposed to do this. Did you do this? So what are you doing?" And he pushed you into doing your ministry
mm,
because he believed that everybody had a purpose. You know, everybody may not be a pulpit ministry. That's cool, but you have something that you were placed on the earth to do. So, and he would push you, and it was so funny that I remember one time it was two elders, and the other elder was not at church that day, so I was trying to make sure that everything was done. We had the communion cups, and everybody was on their post, and blah blah blah. And then he said, "Elder Sonya, come up and give a prophetic word." I ain't what? You want me to do what? But you know, you just had to. He knew what was already in me, and it was me that had the issue. So I had to get it together and get up there and do what he said do.
that
And
part.
it was like it was nothing for him to allow you to express yourself. He was
Mm,
okay with that.
yeah.
Because he knew who he was. So, and whether you were male or female, and you didn't have to do it like he did it, which I didn't. But he was okay with that. And that to me is such a relief from having to be like a cookie cutter person, like, you know, they did it this way and we got to do it. So as ministers, as women ministers, unless you got the gift to hoop, you don't have to hoop.
My
Just do
God.
you. And plus
My God.
that mess up your voice and stuff. But you know,
Well,
if you can do that, you do it. I've never done it. The Holy Ghost has never placed that on me to do, but you know,
only in jest. Now I
right,
can fake hoop all day long, but
right,
it's not gonna come out of a sermon in me. I don't
yeah,
think so, at least.
yeah. I don't think so. I mean, God can surprise me, and if He did, you have to know it's the Holy Ghost.
You
Sort
have
of
you
like the Holy Ghost dance. I can't do that either.
Yeah, the two step. And you know what? I didn't even learn much about that until I was when I was in undergrad. I went to a deliverance ministry. That's where I saw like the holy. I was like, boy, they be moving their feet. Their little feet just be
Yes, yes. I
going.
I can't. Now some of my friends, and then my sister, she would say, I would talk to her. I was like, Lisa, what is it like to do the Holy Ghost? And she said it's like hot coals under your feet, and you just keep picking up your feet trying to get. I was like, oh,
I don't think
okay,
I don't think I'm gonna have that gift.
yeah.
So, Elson, this is gonna be my very last question, and again, I really appreciate you because I know you are busy and booked. So,
Girl, you know I always have time for you. All you have to do is call. You got
yeah,
all my numbers, and you know where I live. So you call me whenever you need me, and I'll be there.
I appreciate it. So, for women who are maybe contemplating going into ministry,
Hmm.
people who maybe feel like they have a call, or people who are maybe kind of, I may have a call, I don't. What would you say? What advice would you provide to them who are maybe interested in going into ministry?
So I would first say, seek the Lord. Seek the Lord. First, you gotta know within yourself that this is what you're called to do, and it depends on where you are, the response that you're gonna get.
Mm.
You know, I have a saying: I go where I'm celebrated, not tolerated.
Oh,
So if you're having a hard time being received where you are, ask the Lord, is your time, is your season up here? Is this where you need to be? Once you've gotten that, yes, you are to go into ministry. Yes, you are to do A, B, and C. Then ask him, where do you want me? Where do I need to go get this training? And then you pursue it. Don't allow someone to say, well, you don't need additional training. Yes, you do. Now, do you need to go to seminary? That's between you and the Lord. That's a cost. Or you can go to somewhere where they have school of ministry, where you're being taught. Because really and truly, the only thing that was missing from the school that I went to was the credentialing.
Mm,
Other than that, it was a full-fledged school with you had to register, you had to go through counseling, the whole nine yards. So I would say find you somewhere where you can continue your education, where you can get some hands-on education. Because if you're at a church and they don't believe in women's ministry or women being ministers, how you gonna get any training? What you gonna
yeah.
so you need to think about that. So begin to ask the Lord, begin to seek out mentors, begin to see where He would have you be, and start doing it. You can't necessarily wait on anybody to pat you on the back, pat you on the hand, and say and pull you along. You got to have some in you to want to get this done. You need to start reading, start looking. Or as you said, y'all went to different churches. Start looking. There's nothing that says that you got to stay at any particular church. Seek the Lord as to where you should be. Seek the Lord as to what your next steps should be. Seek the Lord as to the books you need to read. Seek the Lord as to who should be your mentor. Who should you watch? Sometimes, as you said, your mentor may be somebody that you're not even necessarily in contact with, but you just see. So you got to be prayerful about it. You can't be afraid.
Mm,
If you are afraid, you got to do it anyway. Do it afraid. And you got to step out. When the door opens, you got to step out, and don't be afraid when people push you.
mm,
I have a couple of people that one girl, I tell her, you're not a baby, you're not a little girl, you are a minister. So
mm.
walk in that, and don't allow people to treat you as such. Because sometimes we show people how to treat us. No, I'm an adult. No, I am a minister as well, and no, I know the word as well.
Mm. That's good. And that was the benediction, ladies and gentlemen. This is the second interview that I've done about this topic to where I did not have the props in place. But if you look in her background, you can see that Elder
Oh,
Sonya is a published author as well. And you can find Divorce in the Upper Room and Transition. I can't remember the bottom,
transition from then to now to next.
all available, and I'll put all of her information in on the bottom so that you guys can see it as well. That way you can kind of see where she's at, see how you can get in contact with her, and see if she can come speak to you or your people. Hello,
Oh,
my God, because she has a word. I mean, you already seen it. We had started the podcast, she was already preaching. All we needed was the actual scripture. Where are you reading from, Elder Sonya? What's the text? Okay. But Elisanya, again, thank you so much for being. And listen, like for real, y'all. She booked and busy. She been at the time that we're filming this is still June, and this is being recorded for an October series. But she's out here booked and busy during the pandemic. She's been
uh-huh.
out here doing her Facebook lives. She's been out here reaching the people, honey. And I am so excited that you thought it not robbery. This is what the church folks say. This is how you know I'm a
Right.
teacher. You thought it's not robbery to come all the way to little old Zoom to have a conversation with me.
Baby, I am so honored to be here again. I thank you for even considering me for to have this conversation. I am just honored. Thank you. You know I love you, and there's nothing I wouldn't do for you. So.
All right, Elder, I'm going to go ahead and pause this right now and then we can talk after that.